Warriors come back to mediocrity because that's what you just did to yourself. Makes no sense. You just fired Mark Jackson. Now, do I think Mark Jackson is the best coach in the league? No, not necessarily. But I think he's a good coach. I think his players want to actually play for him. That says a lot more for him than a lot of other coaches that are still in the league. It makes no sense. So, if you haven't already heard, the Golden State Warriors around 2 lunchtime, whatever. I believe it was like 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, somewhere in that area. The Golden State Warriors fired Mark Jackson as head coach of the Golden State Warriors basketball team. How is this gonna go over? That team seemed like a pretty close knit unit. Supposedly there was a little bit of tiff between some of the players and Steph Curry because they felt like Mark Jackson treated them a little bit differently than how they treated everybody else. Whether that's true, or maybe not. But one thing, that team has a lot of talent, and you had a coach that was getting a lot out of them. Now, was he getting the most out of them? Could be debatable. Maybe not. But they won 51 games. So obviously that's a big deal. 51 games in the Western Conference. Not an easy task. They did it. They won 51 games. You don't fire the coach. Uh, I believe Mark Jackson will grow into a great coach. Maybe he might end up in Indiana. I think he would be a whole lot better than Frank Vogel. That's for one thing. Um, I think it's crazy. And the part that makes it even crazier are the names of his possible replacements. Now, when it comes to his possible replacements, these people aren't going. You aren't going to coach or names you've ever heard of. You're going to Fred Hoiberg, a very marginal talent in the NBA during his career. And I remember him playing with Kevin Garnett for a short period of time. He was a 3-point shooter, didn't have much athleticism, didn't have much game in general. And Steve Kerr. Now, Stephen A. Smith and a lot of other people were going off about Steve Kerr earlier on ESPN. And I tend to agree to a point. Um, there really is. I really don't understand why Steve Kerr gets so many opportunities to do so many things. He was a fairly marginal. I mean, he was a good shooter. He was a good shooter for open shots, big shots. So I'll give him that. Wasn't a great NBA player. Was a GM for a little while. In my opinion, he wasn't the greatest GM. He was kind of a gimmick GM with the getting Shaq to Phoenix type stuff. Phoenix never, but then again, that's not necessarily his fault. That Phoenix never really lived up to their hype potentially. I mean, they made it to the Western Conference Finals a couple times, but you could put that on D'Antoni more than Steve Kerr. But with this thing where everybody's bidding for Steve Kerr, it's kind of ridiculous, but at the same time, it makes sense. The reason why it makes sense is it's not because Steve Kerr is some crazy talent. It's because Phil Jackson wanted Steve Kerr. And if Phil Jackson wants Steve Kerr, everybody wants Steve Kerr. Just like the thing where you see it now, all the Spurs assistant coaches are getting head coaching jobs elsewhere. It's because they were with the Spurs. When you have a system that works and you have a chance to steal somebody. Look at what OKC did. OKC basically built their team by replicating the Spurs. They got a Spurs executive, made him the GM of that team, and then all of a sudden OKC's building. That's how they do things. But so that's why there's so much market for Steve Kerr. But back to Mark Jackson. I do think the Golden State Warriors will regret the decision to fire Mark Jackson. He will go on. He will have a head coaching job in a month, or maybe a little bit longer than a month. But as soon as these playoffs are over, or especially once coaches can be signed, he will have another job next season, and it probably will be with the Pacers because I believe that Frank Vogel will get fired, and rightfully so. And I do think Mark Jackson will probably make that team pretty legitimate. So, anyway, that's about Mark Jackson. I think it was a poor choice by the Golden State Warriors to fire him. ridiculous. They didn't try to work with him, and then they fire. They want to fire him for the likes of Fred Hoiberg, even though he did do a good job at Iowa State. I'm not gonna like try to discredit him, but it's Iowa State, it's college, it's not the NBA. I don't even really think he will have players respect like that in the NBA because who's even ever heard of him? Like you have to be a basketball head to know who Fred Hoiberg. When I heard his name, about being the coach of Iowa State, I knew who he was from Minnesota for like one season in Minnesota or whatever with Garnett. Uh, but Steve Kerr, I I'm curious to see how the Steve Kerr situation is going to work out, whether he goes to Golden State, LA, or New York. I'm curious to see because I personally don't see it. And even when I watch him on TNT, he doesn't come with any perspective that's just mind blowing. Like it's not like listening to Hubie Brown or somebody like that. When you listen to Hubie Brown, he points out stuff that goes on the court where you're just like, oh wow, that's what's happening. He gives you because he's a coach. He knows what he's talking about. Even Reggie Miller, you listen to Reggie Miller, even though for some reason people don't like Reggie Miller, he points out stuff. Chris Webber is, in my personal opinion, the best color commentator that TNT really has as far as the commentary goes. So, but we'll see. Ultimately, they say Steve Kerr is number one, but in my opinion, I think Chris Webber's probably. I think he's my personal favorite, so I'll leave it at that. But anyway, that's the video about Mark Jackson. More coming soon. Kevin Durant wins MVP. Congratulations to Kevin Durant. He did deserve it, but I think that's not going to end well for Kevin Durant. In my personal opinion, he is the MVP because he had the best regular season. He had 32 points, like 7 rebounds and 5 assists. His assists grew a lot. He tried to bring more LeBron into his game or whatever as far as distributing the ball. His turnovers, 5 assists to like 4 turnovers. I don't know about that, but whatever. But he did win MVP, so I guess you could say I'm happy that he won the MVP. He did deserve it. He was absolutely deserved. There's nobody other than LeBron, I don't think LeBron. If you look at the numbers, Kevin Durant wins the MVP. But I don't like what I've been seeing in the playoffs. They should be out in the first round. But let's say Zach Randolph plays and they still beat them. Well, what's going to be the excuse now? They just got their butts whipped by the Clippers, but it was only one game. So we'll see if they could beat the Clippers. If they beat the Clippers, it's all fine and dandy. But how is it going to look now that he won the MVP, if he gets eliminated right after, and especially if it's like 5 games or something like that, which I doubt. I think if OKC goes down, it's going to be at least 6 or 7 games. It's not going to be 5 games. But anyway, KD won MVP. Mark Jackson out as the Golden State Warriors coach. Thoughts, comments, leave them below. Like the video, subscribe to the page. More videos coming soon, and the name of the channel will change soon, so don't be alarmed. All right, see you next.